I'm back from Reapercon. It was an event, to say the least. This has been my third miniature convention, as well as the smallest one I've been to. I've been to Earthbound twice now, once in 2019 and once in 2023, and I'm planning a trip to LVO in January, all of which are larger scope events than this one. Overall, my impression of the event was mixed. Let's get into that. Now, the event itself in many ways was the same as any other miniature painting convention that you can go to, and in some ways a bit different. Reapercon on the whole is far more casual and TTRPG oriented than, say, Adepticon, which is primarily a 40k and AOS con. Additionally, you have a minigame in the collection of ribbons. Essentially, once you have your badge, you get ribbons for doing certain things, entering the MSP, classes, buying things, and meeting people. Sometimes specific things can grant you a ribbon, like giving a person in need a marker or a Sharpie. By the end of the event, there were some pretty long trails of ribbons by some people, to the point they had to be rolled up in order to not trip over them. Mine is fairly modest by that standard. As with all conventions, there's of course a vendor hall which had a great variety of miniatures for buying and browsing purposes. Of course, people like Scale 75 were there, but also a lot of smaller vendors with different aesthetics. A great advantage at buying at conventions, you get to actually see the sculpts assembled and sometimes painted, which is far better than looking at 3D renders or photographs on a screen. What's really important, and what you're likely here to look at, is the Master Series Paint Open competition. There were a number of great entries this year, some incredible works of sculpting, and some fantastic pieces of craft. Overall, it was a really enjoyable time. But I hesitate to say that I am super eager to return to the venue in the following year. While the MSP had some good entries, and while I do agree for the most part on the perspective of the judges, I cannot help but think about what is being said by the awards and the models they represent. I personally achieved silver for both painter and diorama for my Tech Priest entry and my Chibi Mitch model here. I also received third place diorama for Dark Sword Miniatures Award and gold from Moonlight Miniatures. You're more than welcome to take what I'm about to say with a grain or two of salt, but I think what I'm about to say is well warranted and well argued. I think the way we judge miniatures has yet to truly leave the grasp of historic modeling and painting. If you're not currently aware, the historic scene of miniature painting is one of strict adherence to reality, one of the very strong representations of what is being depicted in the sculpt, to the extent that you can be penalized for using the wrong shade of red on a British soldier's uniform. Yes, it can have that level of scrutiny. Outside of historical judging, this strict sense of adherence to reality has mostly gone away, but much of its bones have yet to deteriorate. Within miniature painting, we all have the idea of the ideal model. More often than not, it is in the form of the illustrious perfect smoothness. But what does that mean exactly? When people refer to perfect smoothness, what they mean is paintings in which the creation process is hidden, or great care has been taken to remove the sight of brushstrokes. We can call this kind of painting closed brush for brevity's sake. When it comes to what we define as well-painted models, I suspect the reason that so much of our community venerates a closed brush style is because that's what most people struggle with. Most, if not all of us, painted very thickly and chunky in the beginning, and getting the brushstrokes invisible is the first struggle we come across. And because many cannot do this, we venerate those who can, and seeing somebody who can do it to the point of looking like a 3D render, well heck, I don't need to explain why this looks good. There are two things a piece of art can excite the mind with: the actual thing being represented, and the arrangement of color and values within it. Essentially, the what and the how of artistic expression. For us, the representation, the sculpture, even if rudimentarily painted by the artist, will still possess some inherent splendor in its form. The intricacy of its sculpting and what it represents has some degree of interest, even if you were to paint it a completely flat color. In painting miniatures, representing the miniature with all its different parts and textures is a universally recognized factor of the artist's expression, which cannot be ignored without failing in the painting's appeal in some way. While this idea is usually what makes a painting interesting to the common beholder, it seems as if this is the only thing that competitions value. Let me be clear, we should appreciate the craft of realism and closed brush painting. Nothing is inherently problematic about paintings that exude technicality. But for the health of our hobby, I think we should embrace new visions of what a well-painted miniature can contain, especially in a field that is ultimately artistic and not entirely craft-oriented, because there are some problems that can occur when you start putting the brush before the miniature. When the MSP wrapped, One of the great benefits is the Artist Alley, where you can ask artists about your entries and what you can improve about them. I received some good feedback on my work, but I hit something that gave me a bit of pause. I asked a judge, who shall remain unnamed, as to what I could improve about my chibi entry here, as I thought it was quite strong and evocative. When talking about areas to improve, this judge told me that the eyes were confusing because there was only a single light source suggested by the painting, and that because my miniature had 2 additional reflections in the eyes, that it was incorrect, and even chibi models should obey the rules of light.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine, when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they...
Now I must ask, why is it that, in a painting contest, with very aesthetically distinctive sculpts, that the same mindset regarding the rules of reality and realism are being applied uniformly? If I may be totally frank, this criticism feels aesthetically ignorant. It's the equivalent of telling somebody that their anatomy is flawed for drawing anime eyes too large. While technically correct, it also denounces the stylistic choices done by the artist. A painting should be judged on its aesthetic characteristics and the messages they're trying to deliver, not on painting orthodoxy in regards to fundamentals. It is in their creativity, aesthetic choices, execution, technical difficulty, composition, narrative, or the messages being delivered. Let me make it clear, this is not an attack on the judge or on the convention as a whole, but a reflection on what is being communicated by them. General acceptance by the masses is simply too often used as an excuse to discourage critical thinking, but I think it is necessary as our hobby evolves and changes that we do not appeal to authority and tradition without at least a little bit of examination. In most fields, the people at the top are what dictates what is interesting and new. The head of the V flying and guiding us towards some direction. Our Kirill Kanev, Sergio Calvos, Mark Maskelins, and so on. I wonder at times if these great painters fear doing something that is a bit more adventurous for the possibility of being rejected for it. Would we really say that somebody like Kirill Kanev has fallen off, quote-unquote, if he suddenly decided to paint a figure of a more abstract style? One that didn't involve some insane freehanding or texture work? But more often than not, these new types of paintings are rejected because they do not fit in line with what is known, because judges do not understand what they are looking at. This isn't entirely their fault. Events such as had to measure the work in some capacity, and how this is done is usually in things that can be measured, like smoothness, for example. So these end up being the rulers and calipers we apply to work, but I don't believe it should be this way. However much theory and science aids us in expressing ourselves in our work and getting the correct image, art is ultimately dependent on things that are outside objective scientific observation. It is concerned with emotional perceptions that are of a spiritual nature. Our day-to-day lives in the physical world affect us emotionally, and these are the feelings artists are concerned with, which makes us so inscrutable to logical and scientific minds which search for objective measures of things. But when you have a few hundred entries to get through, objective measures tend to be the way you get through all of them. Competitions judge how competitions judge, and the piece of resin you get at the end may not accurately reflect the quality of your work. We should respect those who decide to adhere to realism, smooth finishes, and the closed brush mentality. There is no denying the skill required to get such things. But it should not be the only method respected. We are risking the future of our hobby by putting the fear in the minds of fresh blood, that their work will not be valued because it does not align with the values established by the judges, and they are the lifeblood of any hobby. Let me be clear. This is not a call for a modern art movement to occur in our field of miniatures, where everything and anything that has paint on it gets accepted. I am not advocating for the concept of fine craftsmanship to be rejected for a greater level of self-expression. But is this craft purely in the realm of glazing and smooth transitions? Not in my opinion. There's room for new methods of expression beyond how smooth your transitions can be. For that, I must extend my appreciation to Moonlight Miniatures in awarding my work. Not because it was technically better than those beneath it. I would argue that in fact David Diamondstone had a far more technically proficient model than my own. Am I saying this because they gave me a piece of 3D printed resin spray painted gold? A little bit, perhaps. But their philosophy as to why they gave me this piece of resin spray painted gold is what I want to bring forth. Specifically stated in the server as to why they gave the awards they did is this. Tristan's thought-provoking vignette featured an interesting contrast of man-made and natural elements. a unique magical glow effect, and sparked deeper conversation. This is the kind of mentality we should be embracing in all of our competitions. A mentality that goes beyond just good rendering, and has a vision for all components of the work. All of this rambling is not to demark the convention, or say that any of the judges are dumb or stupid, but it is more of a warning to those who are listening now. Regardless of whether you have a gold, silver, or bronze medal in hand, I would tell you this: do not let that dictate the quality of the painter that you are.